Now, it's a day that will resonate with every Nigerian personally, and it would not be an exaggeration to say that October the 1st for many is a date that resonates with grief. For 63 years, Nigerians have tried to manage their lives in the midst of spectacular mismanagement, trying to be strong and upbeat in the face of institutional and leadership weaknesses, whilst watching the huge potential of their country slowly disappear. And it is the unnatural order, isn't it, when a nation and a people with so much potential wither away so young, with that loss of potential and that loss of the future and the things that could be in sharp relief. That is what makes every October 1st Independence Day so hard for so many Nigerians, especially those who can remember the Nigeria that was before this chronic illness took over. Well, to reflect on Nigeria's direction of travel 63 years after independence, I'm joined now in the studio by the former presidential candidate and former Minister of Education, Dr. Obi Ezekwesilii, who is also a former Vice President of the World Bank, co-founder of Transparency International, and co-founder of the Bring Back Our Girls campaign to rescue the Chibok girls abducted by Boko Haram, and currently founder and chairperson of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, SPPG. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much, Charles.
There's so much to say about you. I almost want to leave Nigeria and talk about you, because I mean, there's so much there. But through your eyes, we may be able to get a sense of where this country is. Is it hard to look back on the hope of independence 63 years ago?
I think it is hard, but with a little bit of ray of light that I see in two very significant groups of or segments of our population. And for me, they really are the young people and the women of this country. What we see coming from them point us to the future, a future where we would realign our potentials with our actions in order to achieve the kinds of outcomes that are desirable for an inclusive Nigeria, for a Nigeria that respects the merits of ideas and would enable, fertilize the human capabilities in the direction that we've seen of countries that have gone ahead of us. So those are my bright lights. The hard ones, and I did a tweet yesterday for the independence anniversary. It actually made me go to look at my previous tweets, and I just felt so sad, because it's just been a recurring decimal that we now have caveats to the way that we look at the Independence Day compared to what used to happen when you and I were younger. I mean, I celebrated my 60th in April, and I do remember what Independence Day used to be like. We so looked forward to it. As school children, my goodness, those marches. And you know, the country wasn't like the best at that time. We were, of course, mostly under military rule. But there was something about, Independence Day that made people excited, especially children excited. So my tweet said something of the effect that Independence Day is now mixed with love, but pained, very deep love, but pained, very deeply pained kind of love for the anniversary that we celebrate. And that's coming from the multiple layers of failures that we see our country epitomize. And it's not just for us, it's also that those who are leaders for Nigeria, outside of Nigeria, they wonder, what's wrong with you? I'm sure you do get some of those kinds of questions
Absolutely.
that I get, where people say to me things like, what are you all doing in that country and allowing this country with incredible possibilities to be the way it currently finds itself to be? Almost a giant with garbs, with dwarfish garbs or garments. And that really is the biggest tragedy of our 63rd independence anniversary.
I think you've put it very appropriately. It's sort of a mixture of both, I suppose. And was it, because you talked about that period of tremendous optimism as a child growing up, and I suppose that it is anchored on the sense of hope and optimism.
Yes.
Was it after the war that the future of Nigeria seemed less assured, and subsequently soldiers began staging a series of what looked like frivolous coups? And by then Nigeria had become or had evolved into a kleptocracy with billions of dollars siphoned off into private bank accounts.
Well, I think if we would take that historical pathway, then we would, of course, look at what it seemed like on the day of independence. I wasn't there yet. I was a child of the Republic, born in 1963. But, you know, by evidence of history, and not just history written by those who were part of history internally, but also people who were academically observing Nigeria at that time, actually, people took a bet on Nigeria. People outside of Nigeria took a bet on us and said we were going to be such a great nation. And so
they actually placed Nigeria ahead of India.
They did. You know, so, and then the democracy that wobbled and gave way to the military intervention that we saw is actually quite instructive for us. It's instructive particularly for me because in looking at what made our democracy so tenuous at that time, so not resilient to withstand the multiple drivers of conflict and eventual collapse that we saw, is that following the exit of Britain from rulership of our country, I kind of felt that we did miss an opportunity. While we had one enemy in the form of the colonizing country, or the colonialists, we could get a collective action around independence. But that wasn't sufficient to make of us a nation. We needed to transit from being geographical entities brought together to becoming a nation of people with very clearly defined aspirations. And so I know by the study of what has happened in many other societies, especially societies with diverse ranges of all of these divides, that when they are able to transit from just being a grouping of people into being a people who, by very tough and yet very important conversation on where do we go from here, who are we, you know, they're able to agree shared values. These are the values we all agree to. It doesn't matter what language we speak, what religion we belong to, what geography we are on. We would have a set of shared values. That helps. Number two thing that helps is they negotiate a common vision. They say, this is how we see ourselves, like what you said about hope, the aspiration of that society. This is how we define it. We want to be a country known for this and that in the Global Committee of Nations, because we would be a stable, prosperous country.
But when you say we, I mean, you're talking about, because I would imagine that these things that you're articulating so well are the aspirations of millions of Nigerians. So when you say we
missed it.
Those people, I mean, millions of Nigerians rely, or at least give, under a democracy, are supposed to give power to a leadership who then make real those things that you're talking about. And if I look at that picture of Nigeria, I mean, after the period between 1999 and 2007, when you were in government, the whole of that, when the whole sort of Africa Rising narrative and resource boom seemed to be personified by Nigeria. And you could see this almost meeting point between the people and their leadership. You know, a lot of money and investment came into the country. Does it feel now like a lot of that investment that you made in your role in government with all the other people in government has been wasted?
I think that you would permit me to say the third thing, because the idea of shared values, common vision, a common vision would encapsulate as many dimensions of what makes for a national vision.
Right.
It would have to do with our economic vision. It would have to do with our cultural vision. It would have to do with our political vision. It would have to do with the principles of our inclusive governance process and mechanisms for determining how we solve conflicts. All of these things would have been so important to negotiate under the First Republic, during the First Republic. And then the third part of it, of course, is a common identity, a minimum of it, meaning that because of our diversity, we would need to define what makes us very proud to all say we are Nigerians. So a set of metrics that say this is why I subscribe to the ideals of being a Nigerian.
Right. So a
these
vision that
things,
unites everyone in that vision.
common identity, shared values, and then a common vision. Now we missed out on that. And then 1963, when we became a republic, would have been the next best time to have done that. I think we did miss out on that. Then, of course, the Civil War and all that followed with it. At the end of the Civil War, I continue to maintain that rather than simply say, no victor, no vanquished, there should have been a conversation to say, we've just gone through the most traumatic experience as a people, and these divides came to the fore during this period. We must now have a conversation for how we will define our pathway into that common vision that would ensure inclusive, prosperous, stable, coherent society. Now, because we missed out on doing that, we saw the series of coups. And then 1999, where you've transported me to, came. And in many ways, 1999 was like a surprise gift, because at the time it happened, most Nigerians had given up.
Nobody thought it was going to happen.
Nobody thought it was going to happen. I think I did see my dear friend Jibo Ibrahim in the studio.
He's coming on next
and he's
after
coming on.
you.
So Jibo would tell you the story of how so many of us who had been activists for the democratization process did not trust in that transition. And because there was no trust for that transition, it was a transition that ended up being flooded by those who had had one form of relationship or the other with the military, and not necessarily the best. They were not.
As somebody put it, the third 11, not the first 11.
Very charitable individual, actually. You know, so what we now have as our democracy was basically designed by that process. A constitution that has many fault lines designed by that process of a lack of participation of a certain cadre of this society. Despite that, and that's what you were alluding to, we had a president, Obasanjo, who was able to rally the country. And I believe
and rally
that...
the world.
Rally the world. I think that part of it was that Nigerians were absolutely ready to succeed. There was a strong appetite to succeed. We saw it when we were in government. In the various assignments that I did, do you know that Nigerians graduating from the top schools in the world would write to me and say, I want to come home and work for you? And a number of them did come
But that's
home.
partly because they trusted the quality of the people who were in government. And I'm curious to know whether, having been yourself at the very pivot of that 1999 to 2007 era, a very hopeful time for Nigeria, whether it would be fair to say that those democratic gains and that hope don't seem to be bedding in well today, that and particularly during the 2023 election, we've seen a rollback by some measure. Somebody said it was a D- kind of level of democracy taking hold. I mean, how much does that resonate with you?
Oh, it absolutely resonates with me. There is a democratic recession globally, but it's even worse with our country. The quality of democracy that we have now shown to the world is not even worthy of being called pseudo-democracy. It is anything but democratic for the electoral umpire to push back on the rules of the game. It is absolutely undemocratic for there to be any form of voter repression in a democracy. It is undemocratic for people who want to exercise the most important, the most critical, the inalienable right they have to exercise their franchise to be beaten up. And evidence abounds that a lot of that happened in the last elections. And we have people who simply say, just move on. Move on to where? I think that the biggest problem of our country has been this attitude of never tackling issues that are on the table for us. So people think that when you demand for accountability for things that have gone wrong, you're simply a troublemaker.
Yeah, you're a disruptive
You're just
person.
a disruptive person. You're not ready to cooperate and collaborate. But that's wrong. Let's look at all the societies that have done better than we have. They never left things that needed to be resolved unresolved. No matter how tough those things were, there were mechanisms for making sure that the justiciable things would be done according to the rule of law. And that if you are a society that quickly says, let's move on, let's just, do kumbaya and say everything will be fine along the line, what then happens is that you actually don't make progress. That's why we have always moved on to move back. That's our story. And that means that if we looked at the kind of democratic gains that we've had, I celebrate the fact of our democracy being one that has held strong over the period when you compare to all the other times that we had spots of democracy. However, the quality of your democracy matters.
That's a
and
critical point.
I took time to go look at this, after I stepped down from running for president, because I came I came in contact with the rottenness of our politics, and I wasn't going to be a part of that rottenness. And so I stepped down from running. I was already a candidate on the what do you call this thing, on the ballot.
Right.
And I stepped down. It was what I had to do was to either stand for my values and really respect the memory of a father who told me that character, integrity is not complete until it is consistent, or I just pretended that I did not see the rottenness and just kept on running because it made sense to run. So I chose to defend my values.
Well,
that rotten politics got more rotten in the 2023
let me take
election.
you up on that point, because that's a crucial point, because you've been there. You've been in the eye of the storm yourself. I mean, how do you get rid of those rotten politicians? I mean, as you said, you ran for president, but you ran as an opposition politician. And there's this myth. I mean, people tend to say, oh, yeah, all the problem is with the people who are in office. You see what I mean? Are the broad group of opposition politicians who've been trying to take control any better than the ones who are in power, or do they make you just as nervous?
So, Charles, I think it is not even proper to call just anyone who is in a non-incumbent party an opposition. Right. You know, because what I saw in the pattern of our political profile is that there is absolutely zero difference between the political parties, big and small. The small tended to be offshoots of the big ones. And my study showed that there's something that politicians regard as political industry, and there is a political market season, and there is all kinds of umbilical cords that tie them together. And that's why, for example, I simply call the APC and PDP the Siamese twins of bad governance, because in a consistent way, we have seen a migratory tendency of those who have been in PDP. At noontime, they are in APC, and then at evening time, should there be some better sets of opportunity in PDP, they would return. So their tentacles are just so tied together that it would be wrong to consider opposition as meaning not being in a party that is not in office. Right. So to your real question, which is the matter of the quality, you talked about the rottenness of governance because of these sets of politicians, and what do we do to change that? You know, in my research, I call it the fixed politics research, which I backed on at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. My research showed that you cannot do much about the existing cadre of politicians in Africa's politics. They have, over time, acculturated themselves, or acculturized themselves into a mindset where the subordination of the common good, of the public good, to their personal and private interest has assumed the status of a political culture. So you have a political culture that subverts the public good as the culture of the African political class. Well, if you're going to do anything about it, you cannot simply be in prayer hoping that they would go through the kind of experience of Apostle Paul. What you must do, I'm sorry that I'm holding you.
Sure, yeah, go on.
What you must do is to say that there is an existing pipeline that operates as a monopoly pipeline, introducing this monopoly product into the market of our politics. Well, we must design a new pipeline.
Yeah, but who's going to say that? And I'm wondering who's going to say that.
You and I.
And who, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that you don't think Nigeria can claw back from where it is.
Not with this set of people. I am telling you, I ran the analysis on this because I'm evidence driven. I ran the analysis on it. When you look at across the continent and you look at the political parties in most of Africa's countries, you would find that the pattern, there is a culture, a political culture, not our culture as a people, but there is a political culture that emerged on our continent where the politicians do not think that assuming political office has anything to do with serving a common purpose, a common good, a collective agenda that makes a better life for the people. That is why all of what you said about the grand listening, so the grand theft, the grand corruption, it happens because if these set of politicians have assumed what my research called the status of political monopolies, it's similar to what you have in economic monopolies. A monopolist has no incentive to change behavior. Wow. A monopolist has no incentive to give you value, whether in terms of price or in terms of quality of the good they supply. So for us as citizens across countries in Africa, to just assume that someday our people will get an epiphany, that they would just sort of wake up one day and say, oh yes, something happened to me last night. I have decided to be a different kind of politician. It won't happen. The citizens are going to have to collectively design a new kind of politics for our continent.
That's a very good point.
And by the way, Charles, when you asked me who would do it, you and I would do it. And guess what? We already are doing it. That's why you introduced me as founder, chairperson of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance.
I was going to say on that despairing note, but given what you just said, I would rather say on that hopeful note.
I agree.
Because I know that you're the founder and chairperson of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, SPPG. And perhaps what we should do is start sending more people to that school. But I want to thank you very much indeed. Dr. Obi Ezekwesilii is a former Minister of Education, former presidential candidate, and as I said, founder and chairperson of the School of Politics, Policy and Governance. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
It's been
Charles.
Absolute delight talking
with you. Thank you.